It was like the day of judgment I have since seen pictured in books. Gertrude Quinn Slattery starts. Pandemonium had broken loose. Screams, cries, and people were running, their white faces like death masks, parents dragging children, whose heads bobbled up and down in the water, a boat filled to capacity with eager, anxious passengers, household pets of all descriptions dangling from loving arms, a wagon loaded to the breaking point lost a wheel, and the despairing mortals riding therein were dumped down in a heap in the filthy water. This is how one of the survivors of the terrible Jonestown flood, Pennsylvania, had described the terrible flood and disaster. What seems like a normal day in the town of Johnstown, Pennsylvania on May 31st, 1889, turns into a tragedy that burdens the area for years and leaves many miles of towns in ruins. Rainfall was known to be common in this area, and even 160 days were reported to see rain in 1889, but then one day just seemed to be too much for the South Fork Dam to handle, and the town of Johnstown reaped the repercussions for many years afterwards. After this overflow of rain landed in the neglected and poorly maintained dam, a wave of 20 million tons of water went tumbling down the valley, destroying multiple towns, railroad tracks, houses, and even taking the lives of 2,000 people. This dam was originally constructed in 1852 and was said to be about 72 feet high by 918 feet long. In 1878, it was sold to Benjamin Ruff and the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club he owned, and part of the team that were blamed for the disaster by many of the civilians, but never actually saw repercussions. Their management of the dam was poor, including lowering the crest of the dam by 2 feet to allow for carriages traveling across, and decreasing the size of the spillway, which is the structure of the dam that was supposed to provide a controlled release of water. So, after many days of hard rainfall, there was nothing the dam could do but overflow. Communication of the flood during this time was scarce at first due to the destruction of bridges, railroad tracks, roads, telephone lines, and other assets used to spread news. During the flood, W.L. Woodruff and his sons were working on a written documentation for newspaper publication, but the first news of the disaster was given by Robert Pitcairn, who sent the message to the Pittsburgh Commercial Gazette, saying, "I learn that Johnstown is literally wiped out. Pit tracks between Johnstown and the Conemaugh is filled with buildings and drifts 40 feet high or more, which is all on fire. All our tracks, as I have said, are badly blocked between Sang Hollow and Johnstown. I fear there will be terrible suffering among those saved, which should be relieved as soon as possible." After the end of the flood came the first issue of newspaper publishing, and the news that was saying what was happening during the disaster. Editor George Swank published an issue of the Johnstown Weekly Tribune on June 14, 1889, 2 weeks after the disaster, stating the intensity of the storm and the rain and the impending doom it enthralled Johnstown in. It is idle to speculate what would be the result of this tremendous body of water should be thrown into the already submerged valley of the Conemaugh. The Great Conemaugh Valley Disaster, Flood and Fire at Johnstown, Pennsylvania, is the name of one of the many representations and lithographs made of this disaster that was created and published. It was published in 1889 by a company named Kurtz and Allison, known for publishing chromolithographs of battles from the American Civil War, and they were also known to be highly inaccurate and considered naive fantasies, but were still sought after by many people. These prints did not want to specifically duplicate the events, but instead wanted to tap into people's emotions. This company is also compared to other publishers called Currier and Ives, who were in business for 72 years, from 1834 to 1907. They were known for providing colored engravings for the people, subjecting all parts of American life, including games, sports, home life, religion, city views, and more. Their large success during their time is prominent because they were able to issue specific prints which the American public always wanted. Kurtz and Allison are known very similarly for providing the artwork that might not be totally accurate to the battles, but that connected personally to viewers with the purpose of a more emotional connection, and provided the artwork that people specifically wanted to see and specifically seeked out. Portrayals of the disasters were not meant to be photographically accurate, but instead served the purpose of being beautiful and enticing viewers and connecting to emotions. There is a lot to be seen from this hand-painted lithograph. It is 66.9 centimeters long by 98.8 centimeters long. The composition of this piece is very overwhelming and full of content. The colors of this piece are distinct, with a lot of light neutral colors for the people and the water, and bright solid colors for the fire and destruction taking place. The bridge is also placed in a specific manner, starting at the bottom right corner of the piece, almost as if viewers could walk right onto the bridge themselves. Distance is created by the scale of certain objects and how they are distinctly in focus in the foreground or background. For the people in the front are very detailed, by even being able to see folds in the women's dresses, versus the hills and the valleys and the rest of the background, which are very light and out of focus, showing the very large expansive area that this disaster covered. There is a lot of moving and flowing water, shown by lighter colors in white, and to show the intensity and energy of the movement of the flood. The many subjects of people are dispersed all throughout, some being shown as little dots struggling to stay afloat, and others being stuck in the fire or on the sidelines trying to rescue others. In this lithograph, women are specifically portrayed as being rescued and running around in hysterics in their night clothes, while men are being seen trying to rescue these women and struggling to survive. Many people were affected by this disaster, and the lithograph is showing many ways the civilians were left struggling to save themselves or others, or just dealing with the repercussions. The civilians pictured in this lithograph are all very similar looking, with the working class men wearing hats, boots, and brown work pants, while all the women and children are wearing light-colored nightgowns or dresses, even though the disaster seems to be portrayed in the daytime. Women were portrayed at this time to gain a more sentimental and emotional connection to the viewers in the disaster. The mother and wife were said to be symbols of the home at this time, so writers and artists, when depicting the disaster, would emphasize the suffering of women and the mourning fathers and husbands would feel after losing this vital part of their family. Nathan Daniel Shapey states in his novel A History of Johnstown and the Great Flood of 1889, A Disaster and Rehabilitation, that this lithograph shows the violation of domestic peace very clearly, and says, the success of this picture to the sympathetic and sentimental depend upon its flagrant incongruity, meaning that the same effects would not be felt while looking at this representation if the artist decided to make specific changes, portraying women maybe more civilly with everyday clothing and maybe hysterics as an example. The reason this representation is so strong and portrays many emotions is due to the beautiful way it is portrayed, even though the scene itself is a disaster and is horrific. The piece flows throughout and is not harsh or gruesome to look at. Overall, the disaster and the way it is represented and communicated about during this time influenced the nation's view on the disaster, representation, and relief. After this flood, the town was said to become filled with tourists and reporters who had to see the ruins in person and who wanted to see the large and devastating proportions of it. Without the news and the spread of information about the flood, no relief would have come to assist the city of Johnstown, and no one would have known what occurred that day.